To anyone passing by, this is only an old building that has been closed down after the pandemic. It started out as a high school and later was turned into a community center, a place for senior citizens to hang out and for parents, myself included, to drop their children off at daycare. Located in the quiet town of Nitro, West Virginia. But what if I told you this was the location of the first human cloning lab? Hey guys, I'm Branskipants and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, what's up? Today we're going to be talking about an interesting time around the turn of the century when the possibility of cloning humans was just around the corner. Since the late 70s, humans had been trying to clone animals. But in 1996, some Scottish scientists finally got it right. They were able to successfully take a cell of an udder of a 6-year-old sheep and clone Dolly the lamb. And it was a big deal. You've probably heard about it. And yeah, it was really promising. It showed that there was possibilities to be had, and it definitely could help in the medical world. But it did take literally 276 failed attempts before they got Dolly right. So the science wasn't completely perfect, but it showed promise. And for one couple in particular, Mark and Tracy Hunt from Charleston, West Virginia, this was a big deal. In 1999, they tragically lost their 10-month-old firstborn to open heart surgery failure. And as you can imagine, how traumatizing that would be to lose your child. They had the hope of the new science and the possibility of being able to clone their deceased child. And they had the means to do it, and they were going to try. They were very grief-stricken and very motivated, and they were determined to make this happen. They were quoted of saying that it would give them some solace. They knew that it wouldn't be their son coming back, but it would be kind of like a twin, and it would help them through this grieving. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How a politician and his wife from West Virginia decided they were going to clone their child. So buckle up and let's go get in this. After the death of Andrew, Mark and Tracy filed a wrongful death lawsuit against West Virginia University Hospitals, West Virginia University's Board of Trustees, and Dr. Robert Gustafson. They were able to settle in a circuit court for $370,000, so with some extra cash, they were able to pursue their options. Mark and Tracy were able to preserve some of Andrew's cells and begin a mission to find someone who could bring the possibility of creating a replica of their son to life. Only 2 years before their son's passing, history had been made with Dolly, so it really seemed like there was a possibility of hope with the new available science. Hunt claimed to have traveled all over, talking to many different scientists to get his plan off of the ground. Finally, he found a website called Clonaid who offered to clone a loved one for as little as $200,000. Now, before we go any further, we have to talk about the people behind Clonaid. It gets a little wacky, and I'm not going to be doing a complete deep dive on them, but essentially, Clonaid is a project or a brand by a religion called the Raelian movement. The Raelian movement claims that life on Earth was created scientifically in laboratories by extraterrestrials whose name is Elohim, and it's found in the Hebrew Bible. It was mistranslated to the word God instead of those who came from the sky, according to the Elohim. The movement also claims that Jesus' resurrection was in fact a cloning performed by the Elohim. And where do they get this information? I'm so glad you asked. An alien traveled to Earth to find a man named Claude Vorhilhan and relay all of this info to him. The alien said that it was his mission to pass this information on to the people of Earth. Claude was a race car magazine journalist, but after the alien encounter, he changed his name to Rael, which means messenger of the Elohim. He eventually stopped writing for his magazine and devoted his life to his mission assigned to him and created the International Raelian Movement. Okay, so now that we have a simple understanding of what the Raelian movement is, we can get back to Clonaid. So Clonaid is a service that is still today offered by the Raelians. but Rael does not do the cloning himself. In 2000, according to their website, Rael handed the reins over to the French chemist / Raelian bishop, Dr. Brigitte Boslier. Dr. Boslier had met with Mark Hunt, and together they formed a company called Bioserve Incorporated, and that'll be important later. Hunt was the financial investor where he supplied a lab, bought equipment, and paid the scientists. We know that he paid at least $200,000 to Clonaid for the cloning service, $5,000 a month to the scientists, bought the equipment, and rented a lab for $347.58 a month. Hunt claims that he spent less than $500,000 altogether. But let's go back to this lab he was able to rent out for $347.58 a month. That seems a little cheap, even for 21 years ago. This is where things get a little interesting. Instead of getting a pristine, fancy lab, Hunt and Dr. Boslier set up camp in an old high school science classroom in the upstairs of a community center in Nitro, West Virginia. This lab was very much a secret operation because the public opinion of human cloning was not a good one. Many countries had made human cloning illegal, and the US was needing to decide on legislation after the success of cloning Dolly. This is what President Clinton said on the matter.
Nothing makes the necessity of that moral obligation more clear than the troubling possibility that these new animal cloning techniques could be used to create a child. That is why I acted in March to ban the use of federal funds for cloning human beings and to urge the private sector to observe the ban voluntarily while we initiated a national dialogue on the risks and the responsibilities of such a possibility. Today, I am sending legislation to the Congress that prohibits anyone in either public or private sector from using these techniques to create a child. Until the day I sign the legislation into law, the ban on federal funding I declared in March will remain in effect.
Although this was 2 years before the death of the Hunt's son, it set the political climate on the subject of cloning. President Clinton proposed legislation for anti-human cloning, but it never passed. In 2001, President Bush wanted to ban human cloning as well. He held a congressional hearing on the matter, and Dr. Boslier attended to read a letter written anonymously by Mark Hunt himself. The letter starts out, "Dear Chairman Greenwood, who am I and why do I support human cloning? I am a successful attorney, a former state legislator, a current elected official, a husband, a son, a brother, but most importantly, I am a father." He goes on to mention the death of his child and how he intended to create a healthy duplicate, a twin, of his son. He mentions how he saved the appropriate cells from Andrew's body and that he studied and read and traveled and wrote letters and called scientists all over the world, sparing no expenses or commitment to his child. I'll have the full letter linked below if you'd like to read it. It was pulled off of the Clonaid website from the Wayback Machine. As the months passed, Dr. Boslier had been getting a lot of attention with the news. Clonaid was promising to be able to produce the first human clone, and they wouldn't reveal where their secret lab was. Eventually, the public was getting very curious about where the secret lab was. So much so that the Sunday Times of London asked an investigative reporter named Joe Loria to track it down. And here's what he has to say about it.
Well, on July 4th, the Sunday Times of London called me and asked me to find Brigitte Boiselier's secret cloning lab. She had left enormous clues in her testimony before the subcommittee of the House in March, when the House was looking to get evidence for the bill they eventually passed to ban cloning. She talked about her secret investor who had lost his son in a hospital mishap. He had a hole in his heart. He died in surgery. He won a malpractice suit. She even released a letter with her testimony from this man, said that he was a local legislator, a successful lawyer, and that he wanted to get his son back. With those clues in hand, I flew out to Las Vegas to meet with Brigitte for an hour interview in Vegas where she lives. I then went up to Syracuse, near where she was teaching. There had been some thought that maybe the lab was there. I thought perhaps it was in the desert of Nevada. Those clues and those leads ran cold. Eventually, I did some very hard work, database searches and interviewing, and I came across a story eventually, after about a month's work, in a database in a Charleston, West Virginia newspaper, September 1999, about a politician who had lost his son in a hospital mishap. He had a hole in the heart. He died on this operating table. He won a malpractice suit, and all the clues seemed to fit. I thought I had the man then. Next, it was finding the lab. So I went down to Charleston, and I had a few places I went to, I thought it might have been, and that wasn't the case. I came back to New York and found a company called BioServe Inc. She had said on her website that she created a secret company as well to do this, apart from Clonaid, which is the overall company that she's the scientific director of. And BioServe Inc. is in the phone directory. It's in the phone book of Charleston. I rang the building manager there, and I chatted with him and asked if there was a lab in the building, and he said indeed there was, and he volunteered the information without me even asking him to tell me. He asked me, do you know who rented the lab? And I said no, and he said Mark Hunt, the politician. Well, I thought that was it. I knew I had the story at that point.
With the news out, the project started to have some problems. The FDA approached Hunt because they were concerned that a human was about to be cloned in this community center. Hunt assured them that the scientists were only supposed to be examining his son's cells to see if they were even able to be cloned. The Christian daycare in the building was facing a lot of backlash as well. Parents were not wanting to bring their children, knowing that a cloning lab was right above them. It also presented a safety concern. If people get angry enough to bomb abortion clinics, who is to say a bombing attempt wouldn't be made on the cloning lab? The last straw was when Dr. Boslier went on an interview and said they were 6 weeks away from a human clone, and the FDA asked Hunt if he had lied to them. He locked the doors and said he was cutting ties with Dr. Boslier because she had become, quote, quite a press hog. So the Hunts were never able to clone their son, but they had 2 other children, and Mark Hunt's political career was never affected by the incident. In fact, opponents never brought it up because people would tend to be sympathetic to the loss of a child. The Raelians are still a thing, and allegedly they cloned a human in 2003. So let me know in the comments below, did you know the first cloning lab on US soil was in an old high school science classroom? Do you think the Raelians were legit or just taking advantage of the grieving parents? And do you think they actually cloned a human? Alright, well that's the end of the video, guys. If you like this, consider giving it a thumbs up. We really would appreciate it. That would please the algorithm gods. Also, consider subscribing if you stuck around this long. And there's a bell, you can ring it and it'll notify you the next time I post. I'll catch you next time. Peace.